welcome. We really appreciate those of you who are viewing these talks, who are being encouraging to this ministry. We hope that we are serving your spiritual needs. And for those of you in Southern California, we plan to be out there for the beginning of the spring festival season. So if you're in the LA area or plan to be in the LA area for that time of year, we're looking forward to seeing you out there as we head out there for the beginning of the spring festival season. And you can go ahead and email us if you plan to be there. Please feel free to email us if you plan to be there, and we'll have more details as time goes on. Now, those of you who are more familiar with the Bible, you're certainly aware of Luke, the beloved physician, and you're aware of his wonderful relationship with the Apostle Paul. They were like father and son. And probably you remember the many times when the apostle took the beloved physician to him and said, "Luke, I am your father." Of course, you recognized that reference. That reference is a pop culture reference. It's not in the Bible, but it has to do with Star Wars. And today, I want to talk about a very serious matter, even though I'm beginning it somewhat frivolously. I want to talk about biblical Star Wars. You know, in the Bible, heaven is spoken of as, you might say up there in a certain way, because heaven is really another dimension. It's spirit. It's not physical. But when we think of heaven, we think of looking upwards to heaven, of course. And the stars are symbolic of angels. In the Bible, the stars picture angels. And there really have been angelic wars. There have been star wars. And they're critically important for you to understand. I want to go to the book of Luke. I talked about Luke earlier. I want to go to the beloved physician and the gospel that he wrote, probably under the supervision of the Apostle Paul, or certainly influenced by Paul because they were so close. So let's look at the book of Luke in the 10th chapter. Here Jesus sends out disciples. They come back and they're impressed with the spiritual power that they have. And in Luke 10 and verse 17, then the 70 returned with joy, saying, "Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name." And so Jesus tells them, because remember, he is both human and divine. He is the Son of God. So now we have, in effect, the divine side speaking. Then, verse 18, and he said to them, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." There was a spirit being who was, in effect, demoted, sentenced, to be in a certain way restrained, yet at the same time, not totally restrained. Because he does have an influence over this earth, and that is Satan, the devil. He has an influence over this earth, and there are demonic spirits that have an influence over this earth. Jesus confronted him directly in Luke 4 and in Matthew 4 and overcame the temptations and therefore qualified to take over rule of this world from Satan. Satan will be ultimately completely deposed, and the ruler of this world will be God through the Messiah, through the Davidic monarch, Jesus the Christ. But I want to go back to the background of how the devil came to be the devil, because God did not create a devil. I want to go to Isaiah, the 14th chapter. Here you see that God created a beautiful angelic being, a creature, a being of light who was supposed to bring light. Now let's first get some background on prophecy. When you think about prophecy, these are visions, these are types, and think about dreams. When you dream, have you ever noticed how when you dream, one person sometimes sort of fades into another because they're very similar? Maybe you think about a certain person who had a nasty temperament, and then that person sort of fades into another person of similar mentality. And sometimes people that you dream about are alive, and others you dream about were very close friends of yours, perhaps, or people you knew, and they're no longer alive. But in your dreams, it's as if they're still alive, talking to you. So think about these prophecies as you think about your dreams, where there's types kind of fading in and out, and that will give you a better insight into what's going on in these prophecies. Here we have a powerful tyrant who's very influential and who wants to be worshipped as a god, but then at times God is focusing not so much on the tyrant, yes, but also on the power behind the throne. He's focusing on the one who gives power to these tyrants, Satan, the devil. And in Isaiah 14 and verse 12, you see the focus. He goes from the king of Babylon to finally he's focusing now on actually Satan. Verse 12, he says, "How are you fallen from heaven?" And then he talks about Halel ben Shachar, Halel ben Shachar, shining light, son of the dawn. What is this shining light, son of the dawn? Well, it's a reference in a sense to Venus, but Venus in the Semitic cultures is a feminine deity. The planet Venus, the morning star, is considered a deity, but a feminine one. But here he's talking to a masculine being, and so I guess the new moon can be a dawn star, but it's not just a star he's talking to. He's talking to a great spirit being who was supposed to bring light, who was supposed to be a halel, a shining light. Ben Shachar, son of the dawn. He was supposed to bring light. When the night falls, it's dark, and then the dawn comes and it gets lighter and lighter, and so you're enlightened. And this being should have been an enlightener. And so we have the Latin term Lucifer for him. In many English Bibles, it's translated Lucifer, light bringer, light bearer. How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How are you cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations? For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. So here was a being who wanted to be above the angels, who wanted to ascend into heaven, into, you could say, the capital, the headquarters of the universe, God's throne. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. In Semitic language, this is the seat of God's power. In Semitic terminology, the northern parts are where God is, the celestial realm. I will ascend, let me go back to verse 13. But you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the netherworld, to the grave, to the realm of the dead, to the lowest depths of the pit, it says. Those who see you will gaze at you. And as I said, it seems to be fading back and forth between the tyrant and then that spirit being. Those who see you will, but ultimately, we'll see the fate, the destiny of Satan is foreshadowed here. Those who see you will gaze at you and consider you, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world, this is verse 17, as a wilderness and destroyed its cities, who did not open the house of his prisoners? And let me just go one or two verses more. All the kings of the nations, all of them sleep in glory, everyone in his own house. But you are cast out of your grave. So here's a being that won't get a decent burial, evidently, like an abominable branch. But you are cast out of your grave like an abominable branch, like the garment of those who are slain, thrust through with a sword, who go down to the stones of the pit, like a corpse trodden underfoot. And I'll stop at that point. But we see here a tyrant being spoken to, but also the power behind the throne. That spirit being who was intended to be a light bringer, but who rebelled and wanted to make himself God. He wanted to, in effect, dethrone God, which is impossible. But something happened to this person. He snapped mentally and developed this super ego and I'm not using that term as Freud would, but he developed this great ego, this desire to become God. And and he evidently convinced a certain percentage of the angelic realm to follow him. So once he made that decision, his mind became fixed, permanently hostile to God, and the angels who followed him became then demons, fallen angels. They became permanently fixed in hostility, and of course, over time, became totally irrational. So one thing, please, everybody, when you think about the wickedness in this world, when you think about the devil and his demons, please don't try to reason out, why do they do what they do? Why do they influence people to behave the way they do? It's irrational. It's self-destructive. It doesn't make sense. And so please don't try to make sense out of behavior that doesn't make sense. I want to go now to Ezekiel, the 28th chapter. And in Ezekiel 28, verse 11 is where I want to go. So here again, there's a ruler of Tyre, and he's called the Prince of Tyre. But now we go to the King of Tyre. So we go to the power behind the throne. And in Ezekiel 28:11, moreover, the word of the Eternal came to me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation to the King of Tyre. So now we go from the prince, if you look earlier, to the king. So now we're going, as I said, from a physical tyrant to the spirit being that pushes him, in effect, influences him. Son of man, take up a lamentation for the King of Tyre, in verse 12, and say to him, Thus says the Lord Eternal, You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. So you see that he could be talking poetically to a great ruler, but if you read it, take a second look, he's talking about a spirit being. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, the sardius, topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emeralds with gold. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created. So musical power. And you know that we talk about the muses. We talk about the influence of spirit on music. And there's a strong connection between music and the spiritual. And music can affect your attitude. And so music can be both used in a very positive way, or music can be used in a very negative way. And you need to yourself be careful about how you use music. Music is a wonderful thing. And the Bible encourages very highly the use of music. But at the same time, if there's music that has a negative influence, then avoid it. You can evaluate if something is positive or negative, and don't fool yourself or try to fool somebody else. You yourself know when something is having a positive influence or a negative influence. On the other hand, let's not be self-righteous about it and say, well, this is, sort of, this music is approved and this is unapproved, disapproved, based upon, I don't know what, loudness, rapidity, some of those issues. Some of these are issues of taste. Don't make your taste into a religion, but realize that music can be a tool. Music is a tool to manipulate. I still remember commercial messages from when I was a child that were advertising products that when I was a child I had no use for, but I could certainly sing the jingles, and I still remember them to this day. So there's a power in music, but as I said, we need to avoid the negative side of that, and certainly we need to, on the other hand, pursue the positive side of that. I want to go further now. Verse 14, you are the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You are on the holy mountain of God. You walk back and forth in the midst of fiery stones. You are perfect in your way from the day you were created. So God did not create the devil, but he became the devil. Evidently, he had free will at that time and made very much the wrong choice. Very much the wrong choice. And he became irrational and used his great power for evil. And those who followed him did the same. And God has allowed it for a period of time. It will not last forever. God is ultimately in charge. The devil can only do as much as God allows him to do. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created till iniquity was found in you. Oh, okay. He sinned. The angels sinned. You can read about it in, for example, the book of Jude. There's a lot of, a lot of material on this subject. I'm only scratching the surface today. I'll have more to say about this, by the way, in the autumn of the year on the Day of Atonement, on Yom Kippur. By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within. This could also refer to gossip, trading in terms of rumors and gossip, slander. In Greek, he's called diablos, the slanderer. In Hebrew, he's called hasatan, the adversary. By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Therefore, I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I laid you before kings that I might gaze at you. So here is what ultimately is going to happen. Satan is going to lose. The demons are going to lose. Evil loses. The dark side, if you want to look at it, as I said, frivolously, pop culture, the dark side loses. Light wins. The bright side wins. You defiled your sanctuaries by the multitude of your iniquities, by the iniquity of your trading. Therefore I brought fire from your midst. It devoured you, and I turned you to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all who saw you. All who knew you among the peoples are astonished at you. You have become a horror. You shall be no more forever. I'll say more about that as we go along. So here we see prophecies that refer to human rulers, but can be also understood to refer to the power behind the throne, the power that we don't see directly, but can experience, unfortunately, because it operates on human society. But we don't see it, but we can certainly see its effects. Now I want to go to the 12th chapter of Revelation, which talks about this in terms of historically and then projects forward into the future. Because there were star wars, as I said, anciently, I don't know how many years ago, and perhaps the universe reflects some of the effects of that. Maybe some of the devastation, some of the wild, some of the comets that go shooting around, maybe some of these things that we see manifestations in the universe and in our own solar system are the after effects of this a battle of ancient times. But of course, God was the winner, and he restrained these spirit beings to be on the earth and to only do as much as he allows. But they're here on earth now, kind of like caged wild animals, who when they're unrestrained, they do great harm, and they have an influence on this world, as you find in Ephesians, the 2nd chapter, as you find in 2 Corinthians, the 4th chapter, and in the 11th chapter. You find that there is a negative pull on human beings. When God created human beings, they were very. He said, verse. Well, let me go there. Genesis 1:28. Remember that when God created human beings, He said, well, I'm going to read it. Genesis 1:28. I'm sorry. Let's go a little further. Genesis 1:31. Genesis 1:31. Then God saw everything that He had made, and indeed it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the 6th day. So when the creation was completed, God looked over the creation, and it was very good. But unfortunately, the way people tend to act, even as little children, is often not very good. What is this downward pull that we have? We tend to call it human nature because it seems to be something that we all have to deal with. Yes, we do. But it is something that comes because there's a negative influence that is here in the world, pervasive, that God has allowed for a period of time and will not be here forever. The time will come when the very nature of people will be different. We will be, let's say, easier. It'll be easier to be good. There'll be a time when it won't be as difficult to do the right thing and to avoid the wrong thing as it is now. That time is yet ahead. I want to go now to Revelation, the 12th chapter. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. So here's a beautiful picture of the Church of God. And in ancient times, it was based on the ethnic group, the people of Israel. They were the theocracy. They were the Church of the Old Covenant, the 12 stars, the 12 tribes of Israel. And from that family, as particularly, as you know, from the tribe of Judah, the family of David, came the Messiah. And he was also, of course, God and man. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. Verse 3, and another sign appeared in heaven, a great fiery red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. You may recall that Satan spoke through a serpent to Adam and Eve, a serpentine creature, a reptilian creature. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his head. Now, you can understand this background if you go to the book of Daniel and then other and later chapters in the book of Revelation, showing how Satan works through human empires and how he will work through a great powerful empire in the end time to oppose the coming of Jesus Christ. Let's go to verse 4 and notice what it says. And his tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven. See what I'm telling you? Symbolically, the angels are pictured as stars. Look at Job 38. The angels are pictured as stars, and 1/3 of them evidently fell and rebelled with Satan and are now demons, and they're irrational. So the idea is just to avoid them. Don't try to reason out what irrational behavior. Just avoid it. Do the right thing. Don't do the wrong thing, and don't try to, as I said, take a lot of time analyzing evil. Evil is evil. His tail drew 1/3 part of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. You know the account. Herod attempted to exterminate the children in that area, the young children, because he didn't want the Christ child to live. Well, as you know, the family fled to Egypt, and yet, unfortunately, many innocent children were killed, but the Christ child survived. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. We know the account. He was crucified. This was needed so that we could be redeemed from our sins. But then he arose from the dead and went into the heavens and reassumed his divinity, and now he is our Savior, our eternal Savior, and he will return as the Davidic monarch and also as God intervening in human history. Jesus Christ will return as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, but he did ascend to God's throne, as you see here. And then the church, now we have the New Testament church, the New Covenant church, which is not centered in one ethnic group, but it is a worldwide, international, universal church of those whom God chooses. And in ancient times, that church fled from persecution because actually true Christians have always been a minority, even in the Christian world as a whole. Those who are really continuing on the path that Jesus Christ laid out are a minority, and they are considered heretical by the majority. For many centuries, they were marginalized. The church was living in wilderness regions, in the mountains and in the rural areas and away from the main centers of power so that they could survive because the church was marginalized. And so we see here in verse 6, then the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her 1,260 days. And we know the principle in Numbers 14:34 and Ezekiel 4:6 of a day for a year. So for 1,260 years, commandment-keeping Christians were marginalized from the 4th century all the way to the 17th century. And it's only since the 17th century, the 1600s, that we've had, let's say, more freely, openly, congregations of Christians keeping the Sabbath and often keeping the annual festivals and the dietary laws and so on. Commandment-keeping Christians, for much of history, they were not permitted to freely be part of the so-called Christian world. And beginning around the 1600s, they were able here and there to openly practice their religion. Anyway, I now want to go to Revelation 12 a little further down. We come now to the climax of human history, and we come to a time when there will yet be Star Wars. And you won't have to go to some secret source to find out about them. Let me warn you about that. You don't need to get some special newsletter or be on some special list to know when these things happen. They're going to be so tumultuous. Did anybody have to tell you, if you lived during World War II, that it was happening? Of course not. So you're not going to have to go to some secret source to find out what's going on. You will know. And there are going to be tumultuous events right before the second coming of Christ because there's going to be yet another Star Wars. Let's go to verse 7. And war broke out in heaven. Michael, who's the archangel, who particularly protects the people of Israel. Michael. There's Michael and Gabriel. We know those two angels by name. I don't mean, you know what I mean. I mean, we know their names from the Bible. It's not like I have discussions with them, no. All right, anyway, verse 7. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. So once again, we have Star Wars. This is at the climax of human history, before the second coming of Christ. And they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. Of course not. God is the winner, but he allows this to happen. There's reasons to allow it. For one thing, the 2/3 of the angels who stayed loyal, they need to see the results of sin. They need to have that witness to them. Here's what happens when you go wrong. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, the serpent. You see, he's called the serpent here. Genesis and Revelation tie together. If you really study the Bible, you'll see how it all fits together. It's a complete collection of material that tells the story from beginning to end. And Revelation finishes up a lot of the loose ends that you find in Genesis. It all ties together very well. That serpent of old, called the devil and Satan. So he's called in Greek Diablos, the slanderer. He's the accuser of God's people. And he's called Hasatan in Hebrew, the adversary, who deceives the whole world. So the world is going wrong. Doesn't mean there aren't good people. Doesn't mean there's not a lot of good in the world. But ultimately, the world is going on a self-destructive course, and it needs the kingdom of God. We need the rule of God. We need a biblical basis for our laws. We need a very different world. We need the rule of the saints, the resurrected saints, and that will come eventually. So I've interrupted this verse a lot. Let me just read it. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they did not love their lives to the death. All through history, people have been martyred for what I'm teaching you today. And there will be yet martyrdoms in the future. I'm sorry to say that. Well, you know yourself. Right now, there are people being killed simply because they are Christian. There are people being beheaded for that. Verse 11, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. And therefore, when we see this final time coming, as bad as it is, we can be happy because we know history is finally coming to an end. This is that final bursting of the flame before it blows out. This is the darkness before the dawn, the darkest time before the dawn. You know the Proverbs of that, that's always darkest before the dawn. Well, that's what we have here. We have that tribulation, and then we have the millennium. Verse 12, therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. So after that final battle in the heavens, and Satan is cast down to the earth with the demons, then he knows he has but a short time, so he goes after the church and persecutes it. Let me just read again what it says in the second part of that verse. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. And then you can read about what Satan does, how he manipulates world events, how empires rise, that enslave people, at the same time give people certain benefits where they're supportive. Many people are supportive of the tyranny to come because they're benefiting from it. But at the same time, within that tyranny, there's an opposing tyranny, and so you have actually world war going on. And finally, Jesus Christ intervenes and ends that whole mess and takes over, and the resurrected saints with him. And you can read about that in the book of Revelation. So you can finally come then to the 20th chapter, and in the 20th chapter, you can see the ultimate destiny of this fallen angel and these fallen angels that have followed him. In Revelation 20 and verse 1, and these, of course, are foreshadowed in the rituals connected with the Day of Atonement that you can study in Leviticus 16. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. He laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. That's the millennium, when the influence of Satan and his demons will not be here. 1,000 years of peace, prosperity, and freedom, with the rule of Christ and the resurrected saints. Verse 3. And he cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal on him, so that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years were finished. But after these things he must be released for a little while. I don't know how long that is. It's called a little while. So after 1,000 years, there's a short period at the end of the millennium when there's finally the war to end all wars. Woodrow Wilson, of course, was wrong. The First World War was hardly the war that ended all wars, was it? But there is finally coming that final war that will end all wars. That at the end of the millennium, that when that little while comes, Satan is released. There's that negative influence once again, but it is ended then forever. So I want to go now to verse 7. Now when the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released from his prison, and will go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog. So the revolt will be centered in Northeast Asia, but it could include people from all around the world. To gather them together, whose numbers as the sand of the sea. They went up on the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. So evidently trying to invade Jerusalem, the capital of the world at that time. And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. That's it, gone. It's all over and never again, ever. Verse 10. The devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, so that he could see the result of his irrational rebellion and all of his cruelty over the centuries. He's cast into that fire where the wicked are, after the wicked are dead, they're just burned up and become ash, so much garbage. And so these are the incorrigibles. The incorrigibles are annihilated. They don't live forever. If you're incorrigible, you die. You don't live forever, you die, and you become ashes. You can look at the end of the book of Isaiah, for example. The devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and false prophet, it should really be were, not, R is in italics, it could easily be were, and really that's, makes more sense. They were put there 1,000 years earlier. And they will be tormented. Who are they? Well, as you know, if you read the rest of the Bible, remember, Revelation is at the end of the Bible. If you read any of the rest of the Bible, you know there are demons. You even find that in the book of Revelation earlier. And so they, meaning the devil and his demons, will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So they will be completely nullified, no power, and everything that they tried to do has come to nothing. Now look at Revelation 21. Now you have a new heaven and a new earth, a whole new beginning. And we go evidently from physical to spirit. Revelation 21. Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea. So the world as we know it has changed completely. And there's a certain poetry, a symbolism to no more sea. The sea is a symbol of turbulence in the Bible. It means there's no more turbulence. Everything is now calm and peaceful. And in this new heaven and new earth, ladies and gentlemen, I don't believe that Satan and his demons will even exist. I think that when the new heaven and new earth come, that they will no longer exist. This is my belief. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, I'm in Revelation 21:3, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. So at that time, yes, we will be men, but spirit. We will have in the book of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 15, it talks about nephmeticon, having a spirit body. So we will still have individual identities. We're not going to be, now with all due respect to Buddhism, they're looking forward to just being part of a universal soul and losing their individuality. That's not what the Christian looks forward to. We will have our own identities forever, individual identities, but we will be spirit. So we will be spirit beings, and we will then be, in that sense, children of God and have a relationship with him not possible at this time when we are physical. We will have a much more intimate relationship with God because we will be spirit, God will be spirit. Well, he's always spirit, but we will then be spirit as he is. So let's go back to verse 3. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes, in verse 4. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. Then he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these things are true and faithful. Yes, good will triumph over evil. Our future will be glorious. And keep this in mind as you study the biblical accounts of the biblical Star Wars.